implicit within the text here is an opportunity for Cain to, and you know what? Now that I think about it, there is a connection here between Moses killing a man and being sent into the wilderness for 40 years. So there is a sense in which it's kind of similar to that Cain has an opportunity to, all the rough edges of his personality can be chiseled, as one once said, in the wilderness, and he can be directed by God in the wilderness, reformed and changed back into the man he is supposed to be. But ironically, what happens here is the construction of a city. So he doesn't wander, he builds a city, and it's out of his insecurity and fear. He doesn't trust that the mark that God placed on him is an authentic mark, right? This idea of I will be protected by God. No, I won't be protected by God. I have to build for myself a city. And why am I saying that? Because Cain's building of a city is not an idealistic turn in the story. It is a reinforcement of the problem. In the ancient world, cities served as the protective fortresses against enemies, against other armies, right? And so Cain was sent into the land of wandering by God, but instead he settles down and sets up shop. Cain's city, thematically, is founded upon the blood of Abel. Very significant that the city is founded upon the blood, that the sacrifice, a human sacrifice, is what is made in order to bring about this city. And this is again, speaking mythically here, this is a pattern that shows up in lots of ancient myths, is the idea of the death that is required in order to bring about human civilization, right? Historian and sociologist French René Girard, he goes into this idea of the founding murder, which shows up in these different stories. So the theme of the founding murder is not only mythical, but also biblical. We find it in the book of Genesis, in Cain's murder of his brother Abel. If you're listening to this and not watching, I'm reading a quote now from René Girard. The account of this murder is not a founding myth. It is rather the biblical interpretation of all founding myths. It recounts the bloody foundation of the beginnings of culture and the consequences of this foundation. How does Cain go about founding the first culture? The text itself does not pose this question, but it gives an answer by virtue of focusing on two themes. The first is the murder of Abel. The second is Cain as the founder of the first culture. This culture is clearly presented as the direct extension of the murder. We find still other references to the founding murder in the Gospels. The idea is presupposed by two parallel passages in Matthew and Luke that mention a chain of murders similar to the Passion and going back to the foundation of the world. Matthew refers to the murder of the prophets. Luke's text has the murder of all of the prophets since the foundation of the world, that is, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah. The last link in this chain is the crucifixion of Jesus, which resembles all the previous murders. It is the death of Abel itself that enables the birth of civilization. And two points here. Number one, this is something that we see in reality. This pattern, this idea that death and destruction is required in order for human civilization and technology to advance. Most of our technology in the 21st century would not be the way that it is and be here as it is had not World War I and World War II happen, right? So that's just one example in the most recent past of how the death and destruction, the piles of bodies, somehow give way, you could say in a causal or correlated way, right? This is not a scientific description. We're describing these things symbolically and metaphorically, of course, and thematically in the story of humanity. It gives way to technological advancement and to the goods that we appreciate today, the goods and the bads, right? There's a lot of that comes out of the industrial and technological revolution that is wrong and bad, and a lot that is good. And this is what you see in the story of the text of Scripture, that Cain murders Abel, that he builds a city, and out of that city come good and bad things, right? Out of the city, out of human culture comes those who play the lyre and pipe, right? So instrumentation and music is born. Culture is born. The idea of being able to sing songs, and this is what is born within the city. But also within that city is metalworking, and that can either be a good or bad thing. Metalworking can be used for tools for the harvest. It can also be used to create weapons of war, right? And so the idea here is that the murder brings about technological advancement, that there's an inherent link between the culture of murder and technological advancement. The military industrial complex, you could say, is the root of that is found here in the murder of Abel. The idea that people make money off of war, right? And civilization, it continues to develop because of war. That the heart or root of civilization and society is violence. Whereas human civilization was meant to be built off of the garden, now it's built off of the city, which is a sort of artificial garden. It's the walled city. It's something that is made, that is smithed, that is crafted by Cain, whereas that ordered realm had already been created. But now he goes to the wilderness, he goes to the desert, and he creates for himself a sort of pseudo version of that, right? He creates for himself a version of the garden that is almost the anti-garden, right? Whereas you have Christ and you have the Antichrist, you have the garden and you have the anti-garden, which is the city. This artificial, God planted a garden. The garden is something that is gifted by God. It is the ordered realm. It is the temple realm. But in the city, you have the same sort of habitable realm, but now it is created by man, not by God. So when most people think of society, they often will think about the good things, some of the good things, but also the bad things. That society is corrupt, that society is broken, that there are problems with society, that there's institutional issues, that there's a sense of systemic brokenness, that there's an evil to the world that is inherent within it. And this is where you get a lot of the revolutionary spirit that shows up throughout, which is ironically just a sort of cannibalism of the same sort of story of what's going on here. But this idea that the whole system is rigged and we need to tear it down, right? Ironically, that is still the way of Cain. Cain has a sense that the system of sacrifice is rigged, and so he needs to essentially take up arms and tear it down, and so he kills his brother. But so we don't want to go the way of Cain by critiquing what Cain ultimately gave birth to, which is a corrupt world, right? That the city that he builds, the first culture, the foundation of culture in the world is built on violence, that it's built on these things where we were created ultimately to be good. Remember, we talked also that there is a glorious past. That glorious past is the realm of the garden. That humans were made to flourish, that humans were made to be fruitful and multiply, to honor God, to be imagers of God, to represent God on the earth, and that every human being on the earth is an image, that they reflect who God is and his goodness and his nature, right? But the idea here is now that as humanity begins to multiply, be fruitful and multiply, as they carry that out, they are simultaneously carrying out and spreading the sin of Cain, right? And spreading the sin of Adam. That this is the foundation layer of humanity, are these mistakes that are being made. And so with that, it's like if there's a weakness in the structure down at the foundation, it will be reflected in the top. And so as humanity begins to ascend, as it begins to build for itself means of ascension through technological means, right? As they begin to build a tower. And so looking ahead to Genesis chapter 11, that it is ultimately a 100% corrupt system. God will redeem the system. Technology in and of itself is not bad. God is going to use technology for his means to accomplish his goals, to return humanity to the state of blessedness. And so we'll get into that, especially as we get into the story of the ark, and as we get into the stories of the temple and the tabernacle, and of course, as we get to the end of the Bible. I just want to remind, and I've already hinted at this, but the idea of cities, even though I had said that there is a bias toward sort of pasture land living amongst the individuals of the Bible that are called by God. Those who are called by God are called into the wilderness, but they're ultimately called to look forward to a city. They're called to look forward to the kingdom, is what is sort of described in the Bible. So Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9 and 10, by faith, Abraham migrated to the land of promise as if it were foreign, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the promise. So what is the promise? He migrates to the land of promise as a foreign land, as a nomad, and he dwells in tents. He doesn't settle down. He's a nomadic herdsman, right? Living in the promised land. But what he's waiting for is the city that has foundations, or you could say proper foundations, whose architect and builder is God, right? So the city that is built by Cain is the city of man. It is the city of death and destruction. It is a city that is born out of these things. What God does is he redeems the city. The ultimate goal is the city of God, right? This idea of this thing that is built by God himself, that is a realm in which humanity is able to flourish. That's what the garden ultimately did represent. That's what the garden was pointing toward. And so when you have in the end of the New Testament, in the end of the entire Bible, you have the coming down of the heavenly city, the new Jerusalem, the city of God. You have a city on the earth that is now fully integrated with the will of heaven, as Jesus calls his disciples to pray, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the idea here is that there is a city that is being looked for, that is being sought after, that is being waited for, and that ultimately a city conceptually is not itself a bad thing. The idea of constructions of humans participating in building, in developing, and working on the development and flourishing of humanity through things like technology, right? Technology doesn't have to be inherently bad, and we're going to see that throughout the rest of the scripture. The idea here is that God is the one who is instigating the development of these things. It's not the willful rebellion of his creatures that is instigating these things. It is God himself who chooses. It is in his timing. And that is how we get into the whole aspect of Cain is looking down at the cursed ground, and Abel is looking up towards where he is going next. He's being led by the Spirit. He's walking with God in the pasture land. There's a passage from Isaiah that I just want to get into that I think sums up essentially everything that we've gotten into when it comes to the cosmic mountain imagery, when it comes to the city imagery, when it comes to the stuff having to do with Cain and Abel. So Isaiah chapter 2. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the mountain of Yahweh, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between nations and settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." What's significant about this passage, of course, is the mountain language, which we've talked about, the idea that the nations now, eventually in the last days, not in the beginning, but in the last days, the mountain is now something that all the nations stream to, right? That they stream up to it. Whereas it's so interesting, whereas in the garden, you had the 4 rivers that descend out from the mountain of Eden and into the world and to cover all the nations with its water. Now you have all the nations in Isaiah chapter 2 streaming up to the mountain of the Lord. But what's most significant here in relation to our passage is they will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Of course, Cain was a harvester of the ground. He was someone who worked the ground with tools. And he, of course, used his power to kill his brother. The idea of the eternal kingdom is a reversal of that, is the idea that they will ultimately turn their swords back into tools for harvest. There's a reversal of the effects of Cain in the holy city, in the New Jerusalem. And so that's what I want to get into last, is just the word Yerushalayim, right? Jerusalem, the city of peace. Jerusalem means city of shalom, or in English, city of peace. This is immensely important and connected all the way forward to what is referred to later in the Bible as the New Jerusalem, the eternal city of fullness and wholeness, right? Jerusalem is both an archetype as well as the literal correspondent. It's a real city. You can go there today for what is known as the celestial city that comes down from heaven, that comes down from God, that God is giving a command from on high, and now the spread of his kingdom is going out into the world and filling the world with the holy city, with the essence of the holy city. So, with all of that to say, the point here is to not say city bad, rural good, urban and rural and rural divides. You know what I mean? The point here is not, it's so that we observe how these patterns they work out in the world, how these patterns work out in the Bible in particular, that the Bible is tapping into these ideas that those on the fringes of society, those out in the wilderness, they are connected to their creator in such a way that is allowing them to, because of their reliance on him, their need for him. Whereas cities, through the technology, it numbs you to your need for God. That ultimately will not always be the case, right? The idea here is that cities, technology, development, human flourishing, that is ultimately the design, but within the purposes of the creation, within the purposes of God as creator, that he has for his creation. That ultimately, what God does is he wants us to follow after him and not take and see and take for ourselves what we see is good in our own eyes. Kill our brother and build a city out in the wilderness, right? We're to wait in the garden for it to become the garden city, you could say.